this episode is about trauma and rise. And I have a client who swooped in for a 50-minute session with me. And he basically sits down and he says to me, tell me a traumatic story that you've been through and how you rose from it. And I'm thinking, great, kind of game on. I'm ready for this. So I begin to tell him the story of when I stood on a sidewalk and witnessed Sam's arrest and how knee dropping that was and how heartbreaking that was. And the tears are starting to roll down his face. And then I talked to him a little bit about the rise. And he says, tell me another one. So I tell him the story about when Sam was at his bottom and his roommate had moved out. He was afraid. He was addicted to fentanyl and he wanted me to bring him home. And I said no. The tears are, rolling down his face. And I'm telling him how I handled that situation and how I rose from that situation because I had a mastermind group that I needed to be at right after that phone call with my son. And so I'm looking at him and he's like, another one. So I tell him the story of a situation with my ex-husband that involved guns and psychological manipulation, I guess I would say, and a bit of terror. And still the tears are rolling down his face. I tell him how, I did some things to deal with that trauma and rise from that trauma. And I looked at him and I said, is that enough? And he's like, one more. So I tell him one more story. And I could have gone however long he needed me to go, because what he needed to know was whatever he was going to tell me and reveal to me, that I knew the trauma and rise, like repeatedly. And I was willing to be open about my trauma and open about my rise in a way that he could relate and he could trust me. And because I was willing to go toe to toe with him in sharing my stories, and I would have gone longer if he needed it, he was finally able to go, okay, and then tell me what was going on for him, because he was clearly at an edge. And fortunately, I rose to the occasion for him, and he was able to share his story, and we were able to have some conversation around it. And I gave him resources to get a hold of in the meantime before he saw me again, because I don't want to be his counselor, but I do have resources that I can send him to, and certainly two people in particular that could do trauma work with him to help him separate the trauma from the emotion and the gut-wrenching emotions around this, so then he is better prepared to make decisions from a place of power and not trauma. I think about so many times when we are personally faced with these traumatic things that happen in all of our lives. We all have things that happen in our lives. And how do we navigate those from a place of healing and rise? Or are we going to? Because a lot of people choose to stuff and move on. And eventually that will catch up with you and it will rear its head. And it will present an opportunity for you to deal with it and do the healing and the rise. But in the meantime, you're going to suffer through. So I think about that as a window into how much people are dealing with so many things right now and ill-equipped, honestly. And who do they go to? Who do they read? Who do they access? Do they even do that in order to be able to understand their trauma, work with their trauma, heal their trauma, and then rise from their trauma to be the next best version of themselves? So given that little story, it's like, what are your choices? What are the choices you're making? Who do you want to be in the midst of the things that you're facing? And these are all choice points for all of us. I'm going to
Yeah.
encourage everybody to choose trauma therapy, trauma things, that modalities to work with to heal and rise. So, what's your choice? Who do you want to be in those situations?